Okay, let's unpack this. Being a trucker right now, it feels less like just driving miles and more like navigating, well, a minefield, really. Constantly shifting rules, unpredictable markets, technology just zooming at you faster than your speed limiter allows.
Yeah,
Keeping pace with all that while you're just trying to get the job done out on the road, it's a serious challenge.
it really is. And that challenge is, well, it's exactly what jumped out from the sources we're diving into today.
Yeah.
We pulled articles covering, everything from that complicated federal versus state clash around cannabis for CDL holders
Right.
to updates on mountain chain laws,
Hmm.
shifts happening inside the FMCSA, and even big tech changes rocking major ports. Plus, we folded in insights from the trucking community itself, places like Life is Tucker.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty simple. For you, the driver, we're going to try and slice through all the noise. What are the absolutely critical nuggets from these stories? How do these changes actually hit you day to day? We're pulling in different angles, different perspectives, just to give you the clearest possible picture.
And here's where it gets really interesting. When you sort of zoom out and look at these seemingly separate events, a driver facing consequences for cannabis, seasonal chain law enforcement, a regulatory agency changing focus, massive tech shifts at port gates, they all tell a connected story.
Okay.
They point to the fact that, well, just driving isn't quite enough anymore. Staying informed and prepared isn't optional. It's becoming pretty fundamental to surviving and maybe even thriving in this industry.
Right. Let's kick things off with navigating the rule book, because that's where the rubber meets the road, literally and legally. There was that story recently about a trucker in California pulled over, cited for having an open container of marijuana in the cab.
Ah, yes.
Huh.
That situation perfectly illustrates that messy collision between, state legalization and federal law, specifically DOT regulations.
Because California says recreational weed is okay for adults.
Right, but the feds, the DOT, still classify marijuana as a Schedule I drug. And when you hold a CDL, federal rules carry immense weight.
Right.
They override state laws in a lot of these crucial areas.
So the source broke it down. CHP makes a stop. The exact reason wasn't fully public, but it was a roadside check. During the inspection, they found an open container of weed.
And that's key. Even under California law, an open container of cannabis in a vehicle is illegal, just like open alcohol.
Yeah.
But for a commercial vehicle driver, the problem goes much, much deeper than just the open container itself.
Oh, so?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the critical takeaway. As a CDL holder, you don't have to be impaired or high to face severe penalties. Simply having possession of marijuana in that commercial vehicle, especially if it's open or, easily accessible in the cab, that can be a direct violation of those zero-tolerance federal DOT rules.
So one state citation.
Exactly. That single citation from state law enforcement can trigger a whole other level of consequences under federal oversight. It could potentially impact your CDL status through the FMCSA or your relationship with your carrier. Big time.
So the advice from the sources for CDL holders, even in states where it's legal, is pretty blunt then.
Yeah, pretty direct. If you absolutely must possess it, store it legally sealed, out of reach, ideally in a sleeper berth and secured. But honestly, the strongest recommendation was if you're running OTR, just leave it home. The risk to your career is simply too high.
And you can almost hear the different viewpoints clashing, can't you?
Oh, definitely. You've got the driver's perspective. Hey, I wasn't high, I wasn't hurting anyone. What's the big deal? It's a natural reaction, given the state legality.
Sure.
Then you have law enforcement, like the CHP in this case, whose focus is strictly safety. They see any non-compliance, even with unused substances, as a potential risk factor, a red flag.
And importantly, the discussion within the trucking community, like highlighted in the sources, points to maybe an education gap.
I think so. Many drivers, particularly newer or younger ones, maybe don't fully grasp that their CDL makes them subject to a whole different, stricter set of rules, the DOT's zero-tolerance policy, regardless of what the state allows for, regular folks. Federal preemption is huge here.
That one story really shines a light on how individual choices and state laws can just slam into federal reality for CDL holders.
It does. It shows another way the rulebook isn't static, and enforcement can come from unexpected angles. And speaking of evolving enforcement, that kind of brings us to something drivers see seasonally, chain laws.
Right. We saw the news about Colorado wrapping up its I-70 chain check patrols for the season. End of May, right?
Yes, that seasonal fixture on the mountain passes.
Yeah.
These patrols run during peak winter conditions, roughly September through May. They specifically target key areas like Vail Pass and the Eisenhower-Johnson Tunnel.
And it's not state troopers doing this?
The CDOT actually contracts this out.
Yeah.
So you're often dealing with dedicated personnel focused solely on chain compliance in those specific zones.
And the financial sting is real if you're caught without chains when you're supposed to have them.
Oh, yeah. Sources mention fines starting around $500, but they can jump up over $1,000 if your non-compliance actually causes a delay, or worse, a road closure.
And those patrols are done for now.
Yep, suspended until next winter. But CDOT already confirmed they'll be back for the 2025-26 season. So, mark your calendars.
The reactions to these patrols are always varied, aren't they?
Definitely mixed. Experienced mountain drivers often just see it as part of the job. They know the conditions, they chain when needed anyway. They kind of view the patrols mainly as a way to catch the less prepared.
The rookies, maybe.
Could be. Or just drivers less familiar with those specific passes. On the other hand, newer drivers can find it pretty intimidating. They might be unsure of the exact chain-up zones or lack confidence in their ability to chain up quickly and safely, especially under pressure with traffic backing up.
And owner-operators have a different perspective, too.
Often, yeah. Owner-operators and independent contractors frequently express frustration about the time lost and the revenue hit from citations, especially if they feel the conditions didn't really warrant chaining yet.
That whole feeling that maybe it's based more on the forecast than the actual road?
Exactly, that forecast vibes versus reality feeling. And you hear that common sentiment, too, about the inequity truckers are heavily scrutinized, while you see plenty of passenger vehicles, sometimes with bald tires, navigating the same conditions unchecked.
But CDOT has its reasons.
They defend the patrols, yeah. They cite data showing they reduce truck-involved road closures, improve emergency response times, and act as a deterrent. They argue it ultimately saves money compared to the massive economic cost of shutting down I-70.
So they see it as a necessary safety measure.
Pretty much. And they're even exploring future tech, like license plate readers, to maybe enhance enforcement down the road.
So whether you like them or not, they're a reality of mountain driving in winter.
Absolutely. And just like the cannabis situation, the chain law example shows how rules and their enforcement are constantly shaped by different pressures, safety, economics, technology, public opinion. It's complex.
It's not just about knowing the exact letter of the law at any given moment, is it? It feels like it's more about understanding the forces behind those rules and how they get applied.
That's a great way to put it.
It connects back to what Hervey from Life as a Trucker often talks about, seeing issues from all angles. That really applies to navigating regulations, too. Understanding the multiple perspectives involved just helps you prepare better, doesn't it?
It really does. And, it's not just the rules on the road or in the cab that are shifting. The entire industry landscape is undergoing some pretty significant changes right now.
Okay, like a big piece of that is what's happening with the federal regulator, right? The FMCSA. We saw reports about budget adjustments, maybe a staff reduction, around 7%.
Yeah, initially that might sound like, oh, great, less enforcement, more bureaucracy. But the sources describe this less as simple cuts and more as a strategic pivot. The agency seems to be reallocating its resources to focus intensely on specific problem areas.
Okay, a pivot. So what are they deciding to focus on?
A major push is tightening up the registration vetting process. This is directly aimed at cracking down on, fly-by-night carriers, fraudulent brokers, shell companies, the ones that undercut legitimate businesses and often have terrible safety records.
So trying to catch them before they get operating authority.
That's the goal, yes. Catch these bad actors before they're even on the road, causing issues.
Okay, so potentially less competition from operators who aren't playing fair. That sounds like it could be a positive for legitimate businesses.
Potentially, yes. That's the hope. And they're also talking about doubling down on using crash data more effectively. Instead of just collecting numbers, they want to analyze the causes of crashes to develop smarter, more targeted regulations.
Smarter regs. How so?
Well, addressing actual identified risks, rather than just applying broad rules that impact everyone indiscriminately. If data shows a specific trend related to a certain type of operation or maybe a particular area, they'll target that.
So how does this pivot realistically impact drivers out there, day to day?
Well, for company drivers, the day-to-day might not change a whole lot unless, your company is one of those cutting corners. In fact, cleaning up the industry might mean you end up working for or interacting with more solid, legitimate companies overall, hopefully.
And what about owner-operators? This sounds like it could hit them differently.
This could be where you see the biggest potential benefit, actually. By weeding out scammers and lowballers who depress rates, you could see a fairer marketplace on the load boards. Getting your authority might involve more scrutiny up front.
More paperwork.
Maybe more questions, a longer process. But if your operation is legit, you'll pass. And the potentially improved landscape could be worth that initial hassle.
And for new folks trying to enter the industry, starting their own company.
The bar is definitely being raised. If you're starting out, expect the vetting process to be more thorough. Clean paperwork, a solid business plan. Those things are becoming even more essential. It might take longer, but it could set a better foundation for the industry.
And the shady side, the ones this is targeting.
Well, the sources indicate they are the direct target of this new focus. We'll see how effective it is.
What's the industry reaction been like?
Seems cautiously optimistic from what we read. There's general support for cleaning up the system, definitely, but also some lingering questions about how effectively the FMCSA can actually execute this with fewer staff. It's that classic do more with less scenario. Implementation is going to be key.
Okay, so the FMCSA is intentionally changing its focus. That's one major industry shift. Then there's another kind of shift, less intentional, the collapse of a giant player.
Ah, you're referring to the ongoing fallout from Yellow Corp's bankruptcy.
Exactly. That news about Yellow selling off terminals is part of the liquidation process. 4 terminals reportedly sold for, what, $6.8 million recently?
Right. These were formerly active freight hubs within Yellow's huge network, now being auctioned off piece by piece. It's a slow process.
Okay, $6.8 million for 4 terminals. That sounds incredibly cheap for major transportation real estate, doesn't it?
It does, on the surface. But the sources explain why. These properties often need significant investment. Repairs, upgrades. They might have been vacant for a while, maybe neglected even before that.
So buyers aren't getting a turnkey operation.
Not at all. They're essentially buying the physical real estate, the shell. And this is just the beginning. Expect many more sales like this as Yellow's assets continue to be liquidated over time.
What does this reality mean for drivers watching this unfold, especially former Yellow drivers?
Yeah, for former Yellow drivers, it's got to be a tough visual reminder of what was lost. Seeing the places they worked every day changing hands, it brings a lot of uncertainty about the future of those specific locations and maybe their former colleagues.
But for other drivers, maybe regional or local guys, could there be an upside?
There could be significant opportunities, actually. Regional carriers and logistics firms are the ones buying these terminals, often looking to expand their footprint. That could lead to new job openings, new regional lanes opening up, maybe increased freight density in those specific areas.
And owner-operators or leased drivers, how should they be looking at this?
Definitely keep an eye on your lanes. New players moving into these terminals could mean new potential loads, absolutely. But it also means increased competition in those areas. It definitely changes the dynamic.
What's the broader industry takeaway from the Yellow situation?
Well, it's seen partly as a cautionary tale.
Right?
About adapting or maybe failing to adapt to changing market conditions, being too big, too slow, maybe too old school. But it's also seen as an opportunity for more agile, smaller carriers to snap up valuable assets, routes, maybe even customers.
And the whole situation with the Teamsters during the bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's being watched very closely across the industry. Lots of complexities there.
So who's really winning and losing in this specific scenario of selling off terminals?
Well, real estate investors and those regional carriers looking to grow rapidly are certainly benefiting, acquiring assets at potentially low prices, smaller fleets. It's kind of a mixed bag, potential new opportunities, but also new, possibly stronger competition.
And the drivers?
But the laid-off drivers, the ones who lost jobs, benefits, seniority, they remain the hardest hit by far. These property sales, while a necessary part of the bankruptcy process, don't instantly translate into jobs or recovered livelihoods for them. That's the tough reality.
So between the FMCSA strategically targeting bad actors and a giant company collapsing under its own weight, it really feels like the very structure of the industry is undeniably changing.
It absolutely is.
And it seems like legitimate, adaptable operations are maybe better positioned now, while those clinging to old models or, cutting corners are facing increased pressure.
That theme of adaptation and positioning yourself proactively, it becomes even more urgent when you start looking at the future of trucking, particularly in areas like environmental regulations and technology.
Case in point, what's happening right now at the Port of Long Beach? That seems huge.
Exactly. The Port of Long Beach is making a really significant push towards requiring zero-emission trucks for all port drayage.
Zero emission, meaning electric trucks, hydrogen trucks.
Correct. Both. The port is aggressively building the necessary infrastructure. We're talking charging depots, hydrogen fueling stations, smart grid systems, everything needed to support this massive transition.
And this isn't some, like, far-off future idea, is it?
Not at all. The California Air Resources Board, CARB, has set a hard deadline. By 2035, all drayage trucks entering the port must be zero emission. That's only about a decade away.
Wow.
And they're running pilot programs right now, testing electric and hydrogen rigs, trying to work out the operational kinks before that hard deadline hits.
What's driving this? Why such a fast timeline?
Several big factors.
Yeah.
First, the really serious air quality issues in the Los Angeles basin. Port truck traffic is a major contributor to that, no question. Second, strong regulatory pressure from state rules like the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation, or ACF. And third, there's significant federal and state funding available right now to help kickstart this infrastructure development. So the money's there to push it forward.
Okay, so let's talk real-life impact. What does this mean for truckers, especially those who work the ports or might need to in the future?
Well, for port owner-operators and small fleets, this is arguably the biggest challenge they face. The CARB rule is absolute, and the cost of a new zero-emission truck, whether electric or hydrogen, is currently staggering. Sources are quoting upwards of $400,000.
$400,000.
Yeah. For an independent trucker facing already tight rates, finding that kind of capital is, well, it's incredibly difficult, maybe impossible for many. If you're not compliant by 2035, you risk being fined, blocked from the port, essentially phased out of that work entirely.
What about company drivers working for larger drayage outfits?
If you work for a larger company, the financial burden of buying the actual trucks falls on the company, not you directly. So you'll likely just transition to the new equipment when they roll it out.
But it won't be exactly the same.
Probably not. Expect practical changes, potentially longer times needed for charging or fueling compared to diesel, adjustments to routes based on range limitations and where the infrastructure is, and just differences in how the trucks perform, torque, handling, things like that.
And independent contractors, maybe leasing or doing lease purchase through a company.
This is high risk for them too. Some companies might offer programs to help drivers upgrade, sure, but others could simply choose to stop contracting with non-compliant operators as the deadline nears. If you want to keep running port freight as an independent, you absolutely have to stay ahead of this rule change.
And of course, there are different viewpoints on this whole shift.
Oh, absolutely. Environmental groups are strongly in favor, naturally. They see it as a vital step for cleaning up the air, and they generally believe drivers and the industry will adapt, maybe with some help.
But the drivers themselves.
Drivers and small fleet owners are, understandably, deeply concerned, mostly about the economics, that huge upfront cost, but also the operational realities.
Like what?
Like reliability of the new tech, the actual usable range, especially in intense stop-and-go port operations. How long does charging really take during a busy shift? As one port driver cited in the sources put it, something like, how am I supposed to wrap my head around buying a $400,000 truck when rates are already garbage? That's a fair question.
And the manufacturers, the tech companies involved.
Well, they are major drivers of this shift, you could say, literally and figuratively. This represents a huge new market for selling very expensive trucks, charging equipment, hydrogen fuel-related services. They have a clear financial interest in seeing these mandates implemented quickly.
And Long Beach isn't operating in a vacuum here, is it? This isn't just a California thing.
Not at all. The sources really emphasize that Long Beach is likely setting a precedent, kind of a blueprint for other major ports.
So expect similar pressures elsewhere.
Absolutely. Expect similar pressures and regulations to emerge at other major ports across the country. Oakland, Seattle, Tacoma, New York, New Jersey, Houston, Savannah, others. Yeah. This move to zero-emission drayage is like a wave that will eventually affect almost everyone involved in port operations, from dispatchers to maintenance techs.
So the bottom line is?
The bottom line really seems to be, adapt or get left at the dock. It's about survival in a rapidly shifting part of the industry.
Adapt or get left. That phrase or that sentiment, it really echoes through all these different situations we've talked about, doesn't it?
It really does.
From navigating complex, sometimes contradictory regulations around things like cannabis and chain laws, to the huge shifts in the industry structure itself with FMCSA changing focus and giants like Yellow collapsing, and now facing down these massive technological and environmental mandates at the ports.
Yeah.
It feels like all these external forces are just constantly reshaping the job itself.
They are. And there are forces largely outside of a driver's direct control when they're just trying to do their job, behind the wheel. And that's precisely why it connects back to insights from communities like life as a trucker and retire from trucking, why it's becoming critically important for drivers to take control of what they can manage,
Which is
their own time and ultimately their own future.
those communities the sources mention often highlight that maybe too many drivers are just white-knuckling it day to day, right?
Yeah.
Without a plan B.
Exactly. They wait until maybe their health gives out or their truck breaks down permanently or their company goes under
Yeah.
before they even start thinking about what's next or
Yeah.
building some kind of financial security outside the truck.
So the mission there is about empowering drivers.
Yeah, the stated mission is to empower drivers to transition out of the industry on their own terms. Not because they were forced out by these very circumstances we just discussed. Volatile rates, economic downturns, company failures, or simply burning out from the demanding lifestyle.
Which is where their proposed solution comes in, right? Training drivers to leverage new tools, like AI, to create additional income streams, maybe recurring ones.
That's the core idea presented, building sources of income online or elsewhere that aren't directly tied to freight rates or the ups and downs of the trucking economy.
Creating something recurring month after month.
Right. Something that can act as a cushion against all this industry instability we're seeing.
Yeah.
Something that could help you retire when you decide, not when the industry dictates. Or, provide essential support if your trucking income suddenly disappears, like it did for those yellow drivers.
It's kind of a different perspective on managing your time, isn't it?
It is.
Not just managing your hours for the shipper or meticulously logging every minute for compliance, but consciously managing your off-duty time for yourself.
Using that time proactively, learning new skills, using downtime wisely, maybe building something online that becomes your asset, not the company's.
And having that plan, that sort of second layer of security that isn't dependent on just being a driver for one specific company, that fundamentally changes how you feel, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It contributes directly to a sense of stability and, yeah, feeling more respected, having more agency, more control in an industry that can often feel pretty chaotic and out of your control.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've seen how regulations, from what's allowed in your cab to how you handle a mountain pass, are complex and constantly evolving. We've looked at how the industry structure itself is shifting, with regulators trying to target shady operators and even the largest players proving vulnerable.
Yeah, big changes there.
And we've glimpsed the future where massive technological and environmental changes, particularly at places like the ports, could completely rewrite the rulebook again.
The picture is pretty clear. The industry is in constant motion. And while all those external forces present real significant challenges, they also underscore the absolute necessity of personal readiness. Building your own resilience outside of just the day-to-day driving job.
And the sources we drew from, they don't just point out the problems. They do highlight some avenues for building that resilience.
That's right. They point towards resources like RetireFromTrucking.com, which focuses specifically on helping truckers build those digital income streams before burnout or bust hits, using skills like AI, online content creation, things you can learn. They mention free guides and training available there.
And also, lifeasatrucker.com, offering more of the everyday tips for life on the road, advice on mindset, mental health support, gear reviews, and just genuine, unfiltered talk about the realities of trucking life today.
Yeah, both offering different kinds of support. The message that seems to resonate through all these challenges and these potential resources is pretty powerful, I think.
What's that?
That smart truckers today, they don't just focus on driving the truck. They prepare. They build something for themselves, something separate, while others might be more vulnerable when things inevitably break down, whether it's the market, the company, or the equipment.
Right. Build in while others might be breaking. So with all of that in mind, maybe consider this as you navigate your week ahead. In an industry where so much feels outside your immediate control, the rates, the regulations, the market swings, the pace of technology, what's one small step you could take today, maybe in your off-duty time, to start building something that is entirely yours, something that strengthens your position and helps secure your future on your own terms?